The evening crowd at Bellevue Heights restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of expensive silverware. For most of the guests, this was just another Friday night of fine dining. For Sophia Chen, it was the middle of a 12-hour shift that had started at lunch and wouldn't end until after midnight. Table 8 needs more bread, her coworker whispered as they passed each other between the kitchen and the dining room. Sophia nodded, tucking a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her feet ached in the required black shoes, and she still had 5 hours to go. She grabbed a fresh basket of sourdough, mentally calculating how much she'd make in tips tonight. Her younger sister Lily had texted about needing new textbooks for her science classes, and rent was due next week. 3 years ago, life had looked completely different. 3 years ago, she'd been on stage at Juilliard, not balancing trays of overpriced pasta, but that was before the accident that took both her parents, before Lily became her responsibility, before music became a luxury they couldn't afford. Look alive. "Chen," said the floor manager Anthony as he swept past. VIP in the corner room, tech mogul with deep pockets. Sophia glanced toward the private dining section. Through the glass partition, she could see a group of men and women in business attire, laughing over what was probably their third bottle of wine. At the head of the table sat a man who looked different from the others, less polished, more intense. He wore a simple dark sweater rather than a suit, his brown hair slightly too long for Wall Street standards. This had to be the tech billionaire everyone was fussing over. "Who is he?" Sophia asked another server as they refilled water pitchers at the service station. "Thomas Reed," the server replied. "Founded some software company that sold for billions. Now he invests in startups and throws money around. Apparently he's hosting potential investors tonight." Sophia was assigned to the adjacent room, but Anthony pulled her aside an hour later. "Mia's feeling sick. Can you help with the Reed party? Just water refills and clearing plates between courses. Don't talk unless they ask you something." The private room felt different from the rest of the restaurant. The air was charged with something beyond wealth, ambition maybe, or power. Conversations about market shares and venture capital floated around as Sophia moved quietly between guests, refilling water glasses. "The next unicorn," one woman was saying. "The team is young but brilliant. Young is right," said an older man with silver hair. The CEO couldn't be older than 25. Thomas Reed listened more than he spoke. Sophia noticed his eyes, observant, calculating. Nothing seemed to escape his attention. When she reached to fill his water glass, he moved his phone slightly to make her job easier, a small courtesy most guests never bothered with. As she worked her way around the table, one particularly animated investor gestured broadly while making a point about quarterly projections. His hand caught Sophia's arm just as she was pouring water, sending a splash across the white tablecloth and onto another guest's sleeve. "I'm so sorry," Sophia said immediately, mortified. She grabbed extra napkins and began blotting the spill. The affected man, red-faced and irritated, muttered something about incompetent staff while examining his wet cuff. "It was my fault entirely," the animated investor said. "I get carried away." "No harm done," Thomas Reed spoke up, his voice quieter than Sophia had expected, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Accidents happen." As Sophia finished cleaning up and turned to leave, she felt Reed's eyes on her hands. She instinctively tucked them into her apron pockets, an old habit from her conservatory days when her piano teacher would chide her for exposing her hands to potential injury. "Wait," Reed said. Sophia froze, expecting to be reprimanded despite his earlier words. Instead, he asked, "Do you play?" The question caught her off guard. "Play what, sir?" "Piano," he said, pointing to her hands. "You have a pianist's hands, and you're protecting them even now." Sophia felt heat rise to her face. No one had noticed that about her in years. "I used to," she answered simply. What she didn't say, that she'd been accepted to Juilliard's piano performance program on scholarship at 17, that her professors had called her a once-in-a-generation talent, that she'd abandoned it all when her parents' car slid off an icy road one February night, leaving her as 19-year-old Lily's only family. Reed nodded, as if she'd shared all this aloud. His eyes dropped to her wrist where the edge of a small tattoo peeked out from under her sleeve. A single eighth note, a reminder of her former life. "Thank you," he said, dismissing her with unexpected gentleness. Sophia retreated to the kitchen, unsettled by the encounter. For the next hour, she moved between tables on autopilot, her mind elsewhere. She'd worked hard to lock away thoughts of music, of the future she'd once imagined. One question from a stranger shouldn't have the power to shake loose so many memories. Later, as the Reed party finished their main course, the conversation turned to unexpected topics. Sophia overheard fragments as she cleared plates. Missed the days when people had hidden depths, one woman was saying. Everyone's so specialized now. That's modern efficiency, someone replied. Better to excel at one thing than be mediocre at many. Disagree, Reed said. The most interesting innovations come from people with diverse interests and abilities. A skeptical laugh from across the table. Says the man who coded 16 hours a day for 5 years straight to build his company. And played chess competitively before that, Reed countered. And studied architecture in college. The conversation shifted to talents and hobbies. A woman mentioned her competitive sailing background. The animated investor apparently painted watercolors. The red-faced man claimed to have once been a decent saxophone player, though no time for that nonsense now. Reed listened, that observant gaze taking everything in. When the dessert plates were nearly empty, he suddenly said, I'll bet everyone in this room has some hidden talent or passion we'd never guess. Even the staff? Someone joked, gesturing around at the servers. Especially the staff, Reed replied. They're people with lives and stories beyond serving us overpriced tiramisu. Laughter rippled around the table, but Sophia, collecting coffee cups, felt Reed's eyes on her again. I'd bet good money on it, he continued, a challenge in his voice. In fact, I'll donate $10,000 to charity if I'm proven right tonight. The table fell quiet, intrigued by the sudden wager. What are you thinking, Thomas? Asked the sailing woman, leaning forward. Reed's eyes hadn't left Sophia. That piano in the corner of the main dining room, is it just for show or does it work? Sophia's heart began to pound. The baby grand piano sat in the restaurant's front corner. Primarily decorative but occasionally played by hired musicians during holiday seasons. It works, Anthony the manager confirmed from nearby, suddenly interested in the conversation. We have it tuned twice a year. Reed's gaze remained fixed on Sophia as he spoke to the table. Our server here used to play piano. I'm betting she's not just good. I'm betting she's extraordinary. The entire private room turned to look at Sophia, who stood frozen, half-empty coffee pot in hand. That's not in her job description, Anthony began awkwardly. Reed waved his hand. $10,000 to a charity of her choice if she'll play something. Anything. Sophia's mind raced. She hadn't touched a piano in 3 years, not since the funeral, when she'd played her mother's favorite Debussy piece before closing the lid on that chapter of her life. Her fingers might remember, but would her heart survive it? I don't think, she started, unless you can't play anymore, Reed suggested, his tone making it sound like a challenge rather than an out. Something flickered inside Sophia. A spark of the person she used to be before responsibility and survival became her only concerns. The girl who'd once dreamed of concert halls and recording contracts. The musician her parents had sacrificed to support. The other diners were watching now. The evening's entertainment suddenly centered on her. Some looked embarrassed by Reed's request, others curious. The red-faced man seemed annoyed at the interruption to business discussions. You don't have to, Anthony whispered, though Sophia could tell he was calculating what a $10,000 donation publicity moment might mean for the restaurant. Lily's face flashed in Sophia's mind, her sister who'd given up so much without complaint, who still sometimes stood in doorways listening when Sophia hummed absently while cooking dinner. What charity? Sophia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Reed smiled, seeing something in her that perhaps she'd forgotten was there. Your choice. Music education for underprivileged kids, she said without hesitation. Perfect, Reed nodded. So you'll play? The restaurant had gone oddly quiet, other diners sensing something unusual unfolding. Servers paused their routines watching. Even the kitchen staff peered through the service window. Sophia set down her coffee pot, removed her black apron, and smoothed her hands down her uniform shirt. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pushing away invitations to friends' gatherings where there might be a piano. 3 years of walking the long way around music stores. As she moved toward the main dining room, she felt as if she were moving through water. Everything slow and dreamlike. The other servers parted to let her pass. Guests watched with confused interest. The gleaming black piano waited in the corner, both familiar and foreign. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she approached it. This wasn't just about a wealthy man's whim or a charitable donation anymore. This was about the piece of herself she'd buried alongside her parents. The question wasn't whether her fingers remembered how to play. It was whether she could bear to remember who she had been. She lifted the cover from the keys, sat down on the bench, and took a deep breath. Behind her, she could sense the entire restaurant waiting. Thomas Reed and his guests now standing in the doorway of the private room. Sophia placed her fingers on the cool ivory keys, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, allowed herself to remember. For a moment, Sophia sat motionless at the piano. The restaurant's soft lighting cast a gentle glow over the polished black surface. Her reflection stared back at her, a stranger in a server's uniform sitting where an artist should be. 3 years. 3 years since her fingers had touched piano keys. She had deliberately avoided this moment for so long that now, faced with it, she felt a rush of conflicting emotions, fear, longing, and underneath it all, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. Behind her, the restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the clink of silverware had stopped. She could feel Thomas Reed's eyes on her back, along with everyone else's. The weight of their attention pressed against her shoulders. "You don't have to do this," a voice whispered. Danny, another server who had become something like a friend during their shared shifts. But Sophia knew she did have to do this. Not for Reed's money, not for the audience watching her, but for herself. For the girl who had once lived and breathed music, who had fallen asleep with melodies dancing through her head, who had believed that music could speak what words could not. She took a deep breath and began to play. Her fingers were stiff at first, awkward from disuse. She chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that had once flowed from her hands like water. The first few notes came hesitantly, almost painfully. Sophia winced at a wrong note, then another. 3 years of silence had taken their toll. In the corner of her eye, she saw Anthony shift uncomfortably. Some of the diners exchanged glances. This wasn't the extraordinary performance Reed had promised. This was a rusty, broken version of what might once have been talent. Sophia almost stopped. Almost stood up and walked away, back to the safety of carrying plates and pouring water. But then she thought of Lily. Lily, who had lost as much as she had, who still kept a photo of Sophia at her Juilliard recital by her bed. She closed her eyes. Stop thinking. Stop trying. Just feel it. It was her mother's voice in her head, advice from her earliest lessons. Music isn't in your fingers, Sophia. It's in your heart. Sophia let her hands relax. Let her shoulders drop. Let the restaurant and the watching eyes fade away. There was only the piano now. Only the music that had been waiting inside her all this time. She began again, not from the beginning, but from wherever her fingers had faltered. This time the notes came more naturally. This time she wasn't playing for Reed or his $10,000 or even for the memory of her parents. She was playing for herself. The Nocturne's gentle melody filled the restaurant. Sophia felt something unlock inside her chest, a door she had kept firmly shut since the day of the funeral. Behind that door lay not just grief, but everything else she had boxed away with it. Joy, passion, purpose. As she played, her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The subtle weight needed for each key, the slight lift of the wrist between phrases. The way a true pianist breathes with the music, not despite it. The piece built gradually, flowing from gentle introspection to something more confident. Sophia's fingers moved more surely now, muscle memory returning with each measure. The initial mistakes were forgotten as she surrendered to the music. When she finished the Nocturne, there was a moment of complete silence. Sophia kept her eyes closed, not ready to return to reality, not ready to become the server again instead of the musician. Then came the applause, hesitant at first, then growing. She opened her eyes to see people at their table smiling, nodding. An older woman in the corner was wiping away tears. Thomas Reed stood in the doorway of the private room, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the restaurant. He gave a small nod as if to say, "That's what I thought." But Sophia wasn't finished. Without speaking, without even fully deciding to do it, She turned back to the keys and began to play again. This time she chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece of extraordinary difficulty, a piece that had once been her signature at competitions. A piece that told a story of longing, of loss, and ultimately of defiance. The opening notes hung in the air, quiet and questioning, and then the piece took flight. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence and speed. The technical challenges that had once required hours of practice now returned to her, as if she had never stopped playing. Runs of notes cascaded under her hands, complex harmonies built and resolved. The music rose and fell like breath, like life itself. This piece demanded everything: technical mastery, emotional depth, physical stamina. Sophia had always loved it for that very reason. It left no room for holding back, no space for half measures. To play this ballad was to give yourself completely to the music, and so she did. She forgot the restaurant around her, forgot the watching eyes and listening ears, forgot the years of silence and struggle. There was only this moment, only these notes that had waited so patiently for her return. As the piece progressed, her body remembered how to move. Her back straightened. Her shoulders relaxed but stayed strong, her head lifted. This was muscle memory of a different sort. Not just the placement of fingers, but the entire physical presence of a performer. The ballade built toward its thunderous climax. Sophia's hands flew across the keys, drawing sounds from the instrument that it might not have made in years. Delicate passages contrasted with moments of almost violent intensity. The emotional journey of the piece pulled the listeners along, whether they understood classical music or not. This wasn't about technical appreciation. This was about raw human expression. In the kitchen, the chef had stopped shouting orders. At the bar, drinks sat unmixed. Every server stood motionless. The entire restaurant held its collective breath as Sophia played on. Thomas Reed hadn't moved from his spot by the private room door. His dinner guests clustered behind him, their earlier business discussions forgotten. The red-faced man who had complained about his wet sleeve now stood with his mouth slightly open. The sailing woman pressed her hand to her heart. As Sophia approached the final section of the piece, she felt tears on her cheeks. She didn't know when they had started falling. They weren't tears of sadness exactly, nor of joy. They were simply the physical expression of something, too big to be contained inside her. Body, the release of 3 years of denied passion. The final moments of the ballade required every ounce of technique and strength she possessed. Her hands blurred over the keys, drawing the musical threads together for one final defiant statement. The last chords rang through the restaurant, powerful and resolute. Then silence. Sophia's hands rested on the keys. Her breathing came hard and fast, as if she had been running. In a way, she had been. Running back through time to reclaim something she had thought was lost forever. She became aware of wetness on her face and quickly brushed away the tears. The silence stretched for 1 second, 2, 3, then the room erupted. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. People stood at their tables. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others joined in. Anthony was clapping so hard his face had turned red. Danny and the other servers were jumping up and down. Even the kitchen staff, peering through the service window, were banging pots in appreciation. Sophia turned on the bench to face the room, embarrassed now by the attention. She hadn't performed for an audience in so long that she had forgotten this part, the vulnerability of being seen, truly seen after giving everything to the music. Thomas Reed walked toward the piano, his expression no longer cool and calculating but open with wonder. Behind him, his business associates were still applauding, some filming with their phones. "That," Reed said when he reached her, his voice barely audible over the continued applause, "was not used to play. That was mastery." Sophia didn't know what to say. The person who had just played, that confident, passionate musician, felt simultaneously like a stranger and like her truest self. "I'll double the donation," Reed continued. 20,000. "And I'd like to talk with you after your shift ends." Before Sophia could respond, the restaurant owner appeared, visibly moved. "I had no idea," he said, looking at Sophia as if seeing her for the first time. "No idea we had someone like you working here." More people were approaching now, diners wanting to express their appreciation, to ask where she had studied, if she performed regularly. The questions came too fast for Sophia to answer. "Give her some space," Reed said firmly, creating a barrier between Sophia and the crowd. "She still has a job to finish tonight." Grateful for the intervention, Sophia stood from the piano bench on shaky legs. The physical and emotional exertion of playing after so long had left her drained. She carefully lowered the cover over the keys, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. As she turned to return to work, her gaze fell on the small tattoo on her wrist, the 8th note that had caught Reed's attention earlier. She had gotten it the week before her Juilliard audition, a permanent reminder of her commitment to music. For 3 years, that tattoo had been a painful souvenir of a life she thought was over. Now it felt like a promise again. Anthony appeared at her side with her discarded apron. "Take 15 minutes, he said, his tone gentler than she had ever heard it. "Then we still have desserts to serve." Sophia nodded, suddenly aware of how surreal this was, to play like that and then return to clearing tables. But she had bills to pay, a sister to support. One moment of musical transcendence didn't change those realities. Or did it? Thomas Reed's eyes, following her as she walked back toward the kitchen, suggested that perhaps everything had changed after all. In the restaurant's back hallway, Sophia leaned against the wall, her hands still trembling. The cool plaster against her back grounded her as she tried to process what had just happened. Her body hummed with leftover adrenaline. Her fingertips tingled as if the music had left physical traces on her skin. Danny appeared with a glass of water. "Here," she said, pressing it into Sophia's hands. "You look like you're about to pass out." "Thanks." Sophia drank deeply, suddenly aware of how thirsty she was. Playing had always been physically demanding, something non-musicians rarely understood. The combination of precision, emotion, and endurance required a kind of athletic focus. That was, "I don't even have words," Danny said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Why on earth are you waiting tables when you can play like that?" It was the obvious question, the one Sophia had been asking herself during the years of silence. The answer was both simple and impossibly complicated. "Life happened," she said finally. "My parents died. My sister needed me. Bills had to be paid." She looked down at her server's uniform. "Dreams became luxuries we couldn't afford." Danny squeezed her shoulder. "Well, from the looks of Mr. Billionaire out there, your dreams might be back on the menu." Before Sophia could respond, Anthony appeared around the corner, his face flushed with excitement. "Chen, there you are. The owner wants to see you in his office now." Sophia straightened, smoothing her uniform. "Am I in trouble?" Anthony laughed, a sound Sophia had rarely heard from the usually stern manager. "Trouble? You just gave this place the best publicity it's had in years. Half the dining room is posting videos online already. There are customers asking if you play regularly, if we'll be starting a music program." He shook his head in wonder. "Just go see Mr. Rivera. I'll cover your tables." The owner's office was a small room tucked behind the wine storage. Mr. Rivera, a serious man in his 50s who rarely spoke directly to servers, stood as Sophia entered. For once, he was smiling. "Sit down, please," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I have to admit, Ms. Chen, I'm a bit stunned. You've worked here for how long?" "Almost 2 years, sir." 2 years. "And in all that time you never mentioned you were a concert-level pianist?" Sophia shifted uncomfortably. It didn't seem relevant to serving food, sir." Mr. Rivera laughed. "Fair enough. But it's certainly relevant now." He leaned forward. "Thomas Reed is not just any customer. He sits on the board of the New York Philharmonic. He funds music education programs across the city, and he's out there right now making phone calls about you." Sophia's heart jumped. "About me?" "Yes, and not only that, he's asked to use our restaurant for a private event next month. Said the acoustics were surprisingly good." Rivera's eyes gleamed with the prospect of high-profile business. "Which brings me to my proposal." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. Sophia picked it up to find a hastily typed contract. "We'd like to offer you a position as our resident pianist," Rivera continued. 3 nights a week to start. You'll play 2 one-hour sets per night with breaks in between. The pay is—" He named a figure that made Sophia's eyes widen. "Plus, you'll keep your regular shifts if you want them. Tips are usually excellent for performers." Sophia stared at the contract, her mind racing. It was more than she made in 2 weeks of double shifts. For playing piano. For doing what she loved. I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say yes," Rivera replied simply. "It's good business for us, and from what I just witnessed out there, it's clearly what you were born to do." Born to do. The phrase echoed in Sophia's head. How many times had her mother said those exact words as Sophia practiced for competitions? How many times had her professors at Juilliard used that phrase? "Can I have a day to think about it?" she asked. "I need to talk to my sister." Rivera nodded, though he looked surprised at her hesitation. "Of course, but don't take too long. After tonight's performance, I suspect you might have other offers coming your way." When Sophia returned to the dining room, she found it still buzzing with excitement. Guests smiled at her as she passed. Some applauded again. She felt self-conscious in her server's uniform, as if she were caught between two worlds. Thomas Reed's private room had emptied of most guests, but Reed himself remained sitting alone at the table with a glass of whiskey. He looked up as Sophia approached. "Mr. Reed," she said formally, "was there something else you needed?" He studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. When she hesitated, he added, "Please." Sophia sat, folding her hands in her lap. Up close, she could see that Reed was older than she'd initially thought, probably in his early 40s, with faint lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he had tonight. "Chopin's First Ballade," he said, "one of the most technically and emotionally demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. Not something a casual player attempts." Sophia said nothing, waiting. "Where did you study?" he asked. "Juilliard," she answered, the word feeling strange in her mouth after so long. "I had a full scholarship." Reed nodded, as if confirming something he'd already guessed. "And you left because—" "My parents died in a car accident during my second year. My sister was 16. Sophia kept her voice even, reciting facts she'd learned to state without emotion. "There was some insurance money, but not enough. She needed a guardian, a stable home. I needed income, not student debt." Reed was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "And the piano?" Sophia looked down at her hands. "It hurt too much," she said simply. "They sacrificed everything for my music. Playing without them there to hear it felt impossible." "Until tonight," Reed observed. "Until tonight," she agreed. He took a sip of his whiskey. "I meant what I said about the donation. $20,000 to the music education charity of your choice. I'll have my assistant handle it tomorrow." "Thank you," Sophia said. "That's incredibly generous." "It's nothing," Reed waved dismissively. "What's more interesting to me is what happens next for you. Mr. Rivera just offered me a job playing here 3 nights a week." Reed raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I said I'd think about it." "Good, because I have a different offer." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "I'm hosting a private event at my home next week. Many of the guests will be from the Philharmonic Board, arts patrons, a few critics. I'd like you to play." Sophia's breath caught. "Play for professional musicians, critics. I haven't touched a piano in 3 years until tonight. I'm nowhere near performance level." "That's not what I just heard," Reed countered. "Yes, there were some technical rough spots in the beginning, but by the end, that was a performance worthy of any concert hall in this city." He leaned forward, his eyes intent. "You have a rare gift. The technique can be polished again with practice, but what can't be taught is what you naturally possess, the ability to make people feel something when you play." Sophia was silent, his words settling like stones in a still pond, creating ripples of possibility she had long stopped imagining. "It's a paying gig," Reed continued. "Practical now. $5,000 for 1 evening. And before you start talking about charity again, this isn't charity. This is me hiring the best musician for an important event. $5,000. For 1 night of playing. It was almost 3 months' rent. It was Lily's textbooks for the entire year. It was breathing room they hadn't had since her parents died, but it was also terrifying. Playing spontaneously in a restaurant was one thing. Performing formally for music professionals was entirely different. "I can see you're torn," Reed said, watching her face. "Let me make it easier. Come to my studio tomorrow, play for just me. If you still feel you're not ready, we'll discuss alternatives, but I don't think that will be the case." He scribbled an address and time on a napkin. 2 o'clock. There's a Steinway concert grand that's gathering dust. It deserves to be played by someone like you." Sophia took the napkin, feeling as if she were accepting much more than just an address. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Reed was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. 10 years ago, I was ready to give up on my company. We were running out of money, investors had backed out, and I was sleeping on my office floor. A stranger took a chance on me, wrote a check that kept us afloat for 3 more months. Those 3 months made all the difference. He finished his whiskey. Sometimes people just need a door opened for them. They still have to walk through it and do the work, but someone has to open the door. Their eyes met, and Sophia saw something unexpected in his gaze. Not pity or charity, but genuine respect. He was looking at her the way her professors once had, as a serious artist worthy of investment. "I'll think about it," she said. Reed smiled for the first time that evening. "No, you won't. You'll be there tomorrow at 2, because whatever practical concerns made you stop playing, whatever grief kept you silent for 3 years, the truth was written all over your face tonight while you played. That's who you really are." He stood, leaving a generous tip on the table. "The question isn't whether you'll come tomorrow. The question is whether you can bear to stay away from the piano for even 1 more day, now that you've remembered what it feels like." With that, he left, leaving Sophia alone in the private dining room with a napkin bearing an address, a business card worth connections she'd thought forever beyond her reach, and the unsettling feeling that her carefully constructed life was about to completely change. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Sophia dreamed of music. Sophia's hands hovered over the doorbell of the elegant brownstone. The address Thomas Reed had scribbled on the napkin led her to a quiet street in the West Village, lined with trees just beginning to show their fall colors. It was a far cry from her cramped apartment in Queens, where she and Lily shared a single bedroom, and the building's heating worked only when it wanted to. She had told Lily everything over a late-night cup of tea when she finally got home from her shift. Her sister had listened with wide eyes, then practically pushed her out the door this morning. "You have to go," Lily had insisted, her face alight with an excitement Sophia hadn't seen in years. "This could change everything for us." "It's probably nothing," Sophia had cautioned, not wanting either of them to hope too much. "Just a rich guy with a hobby of discovering talent," but Lily wouldn't hear it. "I remember how you used to play," she said quietly. "I remember how happy it made you. Even if nothing comes from this meeting, you played again. That matters." Now, standing on Reed's doorstep at exactly 2 o'clock, Sophia took a deep breath and pressed the bell. The door opened almost immediately, revealing not Reed but an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes. "You must be Sophia," she said warmly. "I'm Vivian, Thomas's aunt and housekeeper. He's on a call, but he said to show you straight to the music room." She gestured Sophia inside. "He's been talking about your playing all morning. I haven't seen him this excited about music in years." Sophia followed Vivian through the townhouse, trying not to gawk at her surroundings. The place was beautiful but not showy. Hardwood floors, original moldings, walls lined with books and art that looked chosen for love rather than investment value. "Through here," Vivian said, opening a set of double doors at the end of a hallway. Sophia stepped into a room that made her heart skip. High ceilings with perfect acoustics, tall windows letting in natural light, and in the center a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its lid raised and waiting. "He had it tuned this morning," Vivian said, watching Sophia's face. "First time in at least a year. Feel free to warm up. Thomas will be down shortly." When Vivian left, closing the doors behind her, Sophia stood frozen for a moment. The piano seemed to call to her across the room. She approached it slowly, running her fingers lightly over the polished black surface. This was a concert instrument, the kind she had only played a handful of times at Juilliard. The keys were perfectly weighted, the action responsive in a way that made even the simplest scale feel like music. Sophia sat on the bench, adjusting its height. She began with scales and arpeggios, testing the instrument and warming up her fingers. The piano responded beautifully, each note ringing clear and true. She moved through simple exercises to more complex ones, feeling her hands loosen and her confidence grow. Without making a conscious decision, she found herself playing Bach, a prelude she had once known by heart. The notes came back to her one by one, like shy animals emerging from hiding. She made mistakes, of course, but fewer than yesterday. The pathways in her brain were reconnecting, muscle memory returning with each hour she spent at the keys. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the doors opening again. Only when she finished the piece did she become aware of Thomas Reed standing by the window listening. "Don't stop on my account," he said, moving to sit in an armchair across the room. That was Bach's Prelude in C major? Sophia nodded, impressed that he recognized it. It was the first classical piece I ever learned. I was 9. Play something else, Reed suggested. Whatever comes to mind. Sophia turned back to the keys, considering. Yesterday had been all Chopin, emotional, romantic music that matched her state of mind. Today she felt different. More centered. More purposeful. She began to play Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata. The stormy opening chords filled the room, dramatic and commanding. As she played, she felt the weight of the last 3 years, the grief, the struggle, the resigned acceptance of a smaller life, begin to lift from her shoulders. This time, she was aware of Reed watching her. Not just listening to the music, but observing how she played, how she moved, how she breathed with the phrases. She felt his analytical gaze but refused to let it make her self-conscious. This wasn't an audition. This was a conversation between herself and the music, with Reed merely a witness. When she finished, Reed was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "What happened to your Juilliard scholarship? Couldn't you have taken a leave of absence rather than dropping out completely?" The question caught Sophia off guard. "I tried," she admitted. "They offered to hold my spot for a semester, but a semester wasn't enough. Lily needed stability, not a guardian who was barely home and stressed about practice hours and performances. And now, Lily is 18, starting community college. She wants to be a nurse." Pride colored Sophia's voice. "She's always been the practical one." Reed nodded, considering this. "And what do you want, Sophia?" The question hung in the air between them. What did she want? For 3 years, she had pushed aside her own desires so completely that she hardly knew how to answer. "I want Lily to have everything she needs," she said finally. "Beyond that, I guess I haven't let myself want anything." "Until last night," Reed observed. Sophia looked down at her hands resting on the keys. "Until last night," she agreed softly. Reed stood and walked to the piano. "I have a proposition for you, but before I make it, I want to be clear about something. This isn't charity. This isn't me playing fairy godfather. This is a business decision based on exceptional talent." He gestured for her to follow him to a small desk in the corner of the room, where a laptop sat open. "After I left the restaurant last night, I made some calls. I hope you don't mind, but I found this." He turned the screen toward her. It showed a YouTube video titled, "Sophia Chen, Juilliard Second Year Recital." The thumbnail showed a younger version of herself in a black concert dress, seated at a piano on the familiar Juilliard stage. "Where did you find this?" Sophia asked, startled. She had never posted her performances online. "The Juilliard archives. They record all student recitals. This one has over 30,000 views." He clicked play, and Sophia watched her younger self perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The playing was technically brilliant but also deeply emotional. The camera occasionally showed her face, focused, transported, alive in a way she had forgotten she could be. "That was recorded a week before your parents' accident," Reed said quietly. "Your professors were already talking about major competitions, preparing you for a concert career. Professor Lin called you the most promising student he'd worked with in decades." Sophia stared at the screen, at the girl she had been. "How do you know all this?" "I'm on the Juilliard board. I made some inquiries this morning." Reed closed the laptop. "The point is, Sophia, you didn't just show promise. You were already exceptional. And based on what I heard last night and today, those 3 years away from the piano haven't changed that fundamental truth." He returned to the center of the room. "So here's my offer. I host a charity gala for the Philharmonic every year at Lincoln Center. It's in 3 weeks. I want you to perform." Sophia's breath caught. "Lincoln Center? 3 weeks? That's impossible. I'd need months to prepare for something like that." "You don't have months," Reed said bluntly. "You have an opportunity now. I can get you access to practice rooms at Juilliard. I can arrange for Professor Lin to work with you. He asks about you still, did you know that? I can make sure Lily's tuition and expenses are covered so you can focus completely on preparation." He held up a hand as Sophia started to protest. "Again, not charity. Consider it an investment. You'll be paid for the performance, standard professional rates. And the exposure will be worth far more. Critics, conductors, agents, they'll all be there." Sophia stood up from the piano bench, needing to move. This was happening too fast. Yesterday morning, she had been a server with buried dreams and mounting bills. Now she was being offered a chance to play at Lincoln Center. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. Reed's expression softened slightly. "Because talent like yours is rare. Because music matters. Because sometimes the world needs to be reminded that extraordinary things can come from unexpected places." He paused. "And because my mother was a pianist who never got her chance. She taught piano in our living room to make ends meet. Watching you play last night, I think she would have wanted me to help." It was the most personal thing he had shared, and it hung in the air between them. A moment of genuine connection beneath the business talk. "I can't just quit my job on the chance this works out," Sophia said, practical concerns rushing back. "You don't have to. The restaurant owner already agreed to hold your position. I spoke with him this morning." Of course he had. Reed was the type of person who arranged the world to his liking, who saw obstacles merely as problems to be solved. 3 weeks isn't enough time, Sophia insisted, even as part of her thrilled at the challenge. "It is if you're willing to work harder than you ever have," Reed countered. "The question isn't whether you can be perfectly prepared. The question is whether you're willing to take a risk." Sophia walked to the window, looking out at the tree-lined street below. Somewhere across the city, Lily was sitting in her first college class, taking her own risk on a better future. "I'll need to practice at least 6 hours a day," she said slowly. Reed smiled, hearing the acceptance in her voice. "The piano is yours whenever you want it. Vivian will give you a key. And if I'm not ready in 3 weeks, if I embarrass myself and you in front of all those important people?" Reed shrugged. "Then we'll have tried and failed. But I don't think that will happen." He held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Sophia looked at his offered hand, then at the magnificent piano that had already begun to feel like an old friend. 3 weeks to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. 3 weeks to reclaim the path she had abandoned. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was exactly what she wanted. She took his hand. "We have a deal." What neither of them could have predicted was how that handshake would change not just Sophia's life, but Thomas Reed's as well. Because when Sophia Chen returned to the piano, she brought with her something that had been missing from Reed's carefully constructed world. Authentic passion, the kind that reminded everyone who heard her play of their own buried dreams. And in the coming weeks, as she practiced until her fingers ached and her mind hummed with music even in sleep, that passion would prove to be more contagious and more transformative than either of them could have imagined. The lights of Lincoln Center glowed against the October sky as Sophia stood backstage, her heart hammering in her chest. 3 weeks had passed in a blur of practice, lessons, and more practice. Her hands were stronger now, her technique sharper. But standing here, minutes away from performing for a packed house of New York's musical elite, she wondered if any amount of preparation could have been enough. 5 minutes. "Ms. Chen," a stagehand said, touching her elbow gently. Sophia nodded, smoothing the front of her dress, a midnight blue gown that Thomas Reed's stylist had helped her select. It felt strange against her skin after years of servers' uniforms and jeans, beautiful but strange, like so much in her new life. The past 3 weeks had transformed her daily existence entirely. She had gone from serving breakfast at 6 a.m. to practicing Rachmaninoff until midnight. Professor Lin, her old mentor from Juilliard, had come out of semi-retirement to work with her, pushing her harder than ever before. "You're not just picking up where you left off," he had told her during their first session. "You're beginning again with more life in you, more truth to express. Use it," and she had tried. Each day she felt more of herself returning, not just the technical skill but the joy, the purpose that playing had once given her. Yet beneath the exhilaration ran a current of fear. What if this was all temporary? What if she failed tonight and found herself back where she started? Dreams crushed a second time. "You look like you're planning your own funeral," came a familiar voice. Sophia turned to find Thomas Reed approaching, impeccable in a black tuxedo. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved from benefactor and recipient to something closer to friends. He had attended most of her practice sessions, offering honest feedback and quiet encouragement. She had learned that beneath his businesslike exterior was a man who cared deeply about music, who recognized its power to transform lives because it had once transformed his own. "Just stage fright," she admitted. "What if I freeze out there? What if I forget the notes? What if you're brilliant and everyone realizes what I already know?" Reed interrupted. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture Sophia had come to recognize as a sign of his own nervousness. "You've done the work, Sophia. Now trust it." A flash of movement caught Sophia's eye. Lily appeared in the wings, radiant in a borrowed dress, her face glowing with pride. "You came," Sophia said, embracing her sister tightly. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," Lily replied. "Your name is on the program. Your photo is in the lobby. My sister, the concert pianist." "Not yet," Sophia cautioned. "Let's see if I survive tonight first." "You'll more than survive," Reed said. He looked at his watch. "They're about to announce you. Remember what Lynn told you? Connect with the music before I connect with the audience," Sophia finished. It had become her mantra during these weeks of preparation. "Exactly." Reed squeezed her shoulder briefly, a rare physical gesture from him. "We'll be right here." The stagehand reappeared. "It's time, Ms. Chen." Sophia took a deep breath, looking from her sister to Reed, these two people who believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself. Then she turned and walked onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding at first. The concert hall stretched before her, hundreds of faces looking up expectantly. She spotted Professor Lin in the front row, his expression serious but encouraging. Behind him sat the critics, the conductors, the patrons Reed had invited specifically to hear her play. Sophia approached the gleaming grand piano at center stage. She bowed to the audience, then settled on the bench, adjusting it slightly. Her hands were cold, her mouth dry. For a terrible moment she feared she might actually flee. Then she looked down at her wrist at the small musical note tattooed there. She thought of her parents who had sacrificed so much for her music. She thought of Lily, who had never complained even when their lives fell apart. She thought of Reed, who had seen something in her worth fighting for, and finally, she thought of herself, the girl who had once lived for this feeling, this moment of connection between artist and audience, between human emotion and pure sound. Sophia placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece from her last Juilliard recital, the one Reed had shown her on his laptop. It was incredibly difficult, demanding technical precision, emotional depth, and physical stamina. But it was also a piece about resurrection, about finding light after darkness. Rachmaninoff had written it after recovering from a deep depression, and its journey from struggle to triumph matched Sophia's own. The chamber orchestra behind her joined in, but Sophia barely heard them. She was focused entirely on the music flowing from her fingers, on the story she was telling with each phrase. The months of silence, the grief, the daily struggles, all of it poured into her playing, transforming pain into beauty. As the first movement built to its climax, Sophia felt something unexpected, a sense of absolute freedom. The nerves had vanished. The doubts had quieted. There was only this moment, only this music that had waited so patiently for her return. She moved through the lyrical second movement with growing confidence. Her fingers found the keys without conscious thought, as if the music had become part of her physical being. When she reached the famous opening of the third movement, those rippling, joyful notes that seemed to dance up the keyboard, she felt herself smiling. The final moments of the concerto demanded everything she had. Cascading chords, thunderous octaves, delicate runs that sparkled like light on water. Sophia held nothing back, giving herself completely to the music in a way she never had before. Not even in her most promising days at Juilliard. Because now she understood what she was playing for. Not for grades or approval or even a career. She was playing for the pure joy of it, for the privilege of bringing this music to life. For everyone who had ever lost something precious and found the courage to begin again. The final chords resonated through the hall, powerful and triumphant. Sophia's hands lifted from the keys, and for a moment there was absolute silence. Then the audience erupted. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. People rose to their feet shouting "Brava!" and applauding with a passion rarely seen even in this hall that had witnessed countless standing ovations. Professor Lin was beaming, tears streaming down his cheeks. The conductor extended his hand to Sophia, helping her rise for her bows as the applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. In the wings, Lily was jumping up and down, clapping wildly. Beside her, Thomas Reed stood perfectly still, his usual composure replaced by something that looked remarkably like awe. Sophia bowed again and again, trying to take in what was happening. This wasn't polite appreciation. This wasn't even enthusiastic approval. This was the kind of response that changed lives, that launched careers. As she finally left the stage, bouquets of flowers were thrust into her arms. Backstage became a blur of congratulations, orchestra members patting her shoulder, stagehands grinning, administrators from the Philharmonic already talking about future engagements. Through it all, Sophia felt strangely calm. Whatever happened next, whether this night led to a concert career or simply remained the most beautiful memory of her life, she had reclaimed something essential. She had remembered who she was. Lily reached her first, throwing her arms around her sister with such force that rose petals scattered across the floor. "You were amazing!" Everyone was crying, even that scary critic from the Times. Sophia laughed, returning the hug. "I don't know about that, but it felt right, like coming home." When they separated, Thomas Reed was standing nearby, uncharacteristically quiet. "Well?" Sophia asked, suddenly nervous again under his thoughtful gaze. "Was it worth the investment?" Reed shook his head slowly. "That wasn't business. That wasn't an investment." He gestured toward the stage where applause could still be heard. "That was art, Sophia. Pure and true. The kind that reminds us all why we're alive." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Professor Lin, followed by a small crowd of important-looking people in evening wear. "My dear girl," Lin said, embracing her. "Extraordinary. Even better than before." He turned to the group behind him. "May I introduce Howard Grant, Artistic Director of the Philharmonic, and Elena Vasquez from the International Piano Competition Committee." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions, praise, and opportunities. Grant wanted to discuss upcoming guest soloist positions. Vasquez invited her to compete in the prestigious competition next spring, with all expenses covered. A representative from a recording label handed her a business card with a personal cell phone number scrawled on the back. In less than 30 minutes, Sophia's future had transformed from uncertain to overflowing with possibilities. It was dizzying, overwhelming, and utterly wonderful. As the crowd finally thinned, Reed touched her elbow. "There's someone else who wants to meet you," he said, guiding her toward a distinguished older couple waiting patiently nearby. "The Kellers. They run a music education foundation for underprivileged children." Mrs. Keller stepped forward, her eyes bright with emotion. "Ms. Chen, your playing was magnificent. Thomas has told us your story, and we believe you would be an inspiration to our students. Would you consider becoming our artist in residence? It includes teaching, mentoring, and performing with a substantial stipend." Sophia looked at Reed, who smiled slightly. "The $20,000 donation I promised? It went to their foundation. I thought you might want to be involved beyond just the money." Understanding dawned on Sophia. Reed hadn't just opened a door for her career. He had found a way for her to help open doors for others. Children who, like her, had talent but faced obstacles. Children who needed someone to believe in them. "I would be honored," she said simply. Later that night, long after the applause had faded and the concert hall had emptied, Sophia returned to the restaurant where it had all begun. It was closed now, the dining room dark except for a single light above the piano in the corner. With her gown rustling softly against the floor, she crossed to the instrument and sat down. This was where Thomas Reed had first challenged her to play, where she had first remembered who she was. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play, not Rachmaninoff or Chopin or any of the grand concert pieces, but a simple lullaby her mother had taught her when she was very young. The melody floated through the empty restaurant, a private thank you to the place where her second chance had begun. From the doorway, Reed watched silently, knowing he was witnessing something rare and precious, a life reclaimed, a gift restored. In 3 weeks, he had seen Sophia transform from a server hiding her talent to an artist embracing her power. But more than that, he had seen her courage, her determination, her heart. What had started as a dinner party wager had become something far more meaningful. Reed had opened a door, yes, but Sophia had walked through it with a grace and strength entirely her own. As the final notes of her mother's lullaby faded away, Sophia looked up and saw Reed standing there. Their eyes met across the darkened restaurant, and they shared a smile of quiet understanding. Some journeys began in unlikely places. Some talents refused to stay hidden, and sometimes a single moment of courage could change everything.